for all of us, there is a deep longing to be known and be understood and loved and cared for. We move towards it. We seek it. We seek it out, and we're pointed in that direction, even if it means gaining it in unhealthy and ungodly ways sometimes.
Yeah. Welcome, everyone, to Breaking Bread, the podcast brought to you by Apostolic Christian Counseling and Family Services. I'm Matt Kaufman. Glad to have you along. Kaleb Beyer is with me today.
It's good to be with you, Matt.
Welcome, Kaleb. Kaleb is our marriage and family specialist. You know, Kaleb, whenever you have a specialist of any type, there's a couple of categories that a specialist understands. One is good, healthy function of whatever it is they're a specialist of, whether it be the car engine or the human body or relationship, as is your work. But you also have an eye towards and a pretty good understanding of dysfunction. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Both function and dysfunction.
Yeah.
And today we're going to talk about a dysfunction. But whenever we talk about a dysfunction, there's always a counter, really healthy function that we're speaking about too, right?
Yes. Yeah. And oftentimes, when we speak about dysfunction, it can be at times the things that get in the way of a healthy functioning system. Or put a different way, when we don't have a healthy functioning system, it gives rise to, even
Potential dysfunction.
Yeah. Or infection, or think about our bodies in that sense, right? And so they do go together, for sure.
And we're going to talk specifically in the dysfunction of emotional connections outside of marriage. It can go by emotional betrayal, could be called emotional affair. It's often called a dysfunction that's a common enough household term. But Kaleb, I welcome your insight into these matters as a person who would see more colors and more shades to the dysfunction than what perhaps we do. And I think that can be very helpful.
Yeah, looking forward to the conversation. It is a challenging conversation, Matt, but I think important and challenging on a number of fronts. Challenging in the sense of just the reality of walking through a betrayal, but I think also challenging, particularly when it comes to emotional affairs, in the fact that it does at times lack the clarity that we would like to have. Certainly, I think it will be good to talk through, certain signposts or things along the path, but there are certain nuances, in situations that can be difficult to really pull apart.
I appreciate that. I think that is part of the delicate nature of this particular topic. We take a physical affair, for example, and there's some very pointed questions that can be answered yes or no to somewhat, make that very clear. And I think there's a clearer boundary, as slippery as that one is, because there's intimacy along the physical spectrum.
Yeah.
For sure. But and so there's a spectrum here of intimacy along the emotional spectrum, but when lines are crossed, might not be as obvious, right?
Yes, correct.
Which makes it a bit insidious,
yeah,
right? And so, yes, let's maybe start with a definition. Maybe let's work this idea out. What is an emotional betrayal? What's that look like? And we're specifically talking about a marital relationship.
Yeah, I appreciate that kind of grounding, even as in our conversation today. So Jesus, when he communicated that what man has joined together, right? Let no man put asunder or somehow disrupt. And so there is a union that's lifelong. It's not temporary. It's not. And so in some way, an emotional affair is a form of betrayal that takes something that is rightfully the spouse's based on that covenant, and then gives it to somebody else outside of the relationship, right? In this case, we're talking about emotional, so our heart, our longings, our desires, sharing and disclosing intimate details and information, and really giving our heart to someone else other than the one that we've committed to.
Yeah, and I think maybe spelling out that and what that looks like, I think, is quite welcome, because even as you address that, where does the flags start to fly? In terms of sharing one's heart with another person, right?
Yes,
not altogether bad. In fact, as human beings, quite natural, normal, healthy at some level.
Yes,
and then all of a sudden, not healthy at another.
Yes, and in many ways, we would say, Matt, healthy relationships outside the marriage. Like, it's not healthy to have a marriage on an island
by itself.
Yes, right. But to have, a community that's walking around us to hold us accountable, to encourage us. And so we would say we value relationships, and we need relationships outside the marriage.
Yeah, we could even back up now, and pardon the metaphor here, but I'm teaching a little bit of junior high science. Okay.
I'm ready to learn.
We're talking about forces. We're talking about forces and Newton's laws and that type of thing. But, put simply, a force sets objects in motion, or it slows objects from motion, right? Mm-hmm. There are human forces that sets us in motion towards one another. We can go all the way back to the beginning. We've been made relational. To further geek out, a force is a vector. It points us. It points us in a direction, right? It says not only go someplace, it says go that direction. So humans have forces, and we have to, at some level, understand the forces at play, don't we? Mm-hmm. And in marriage, we have a very clear direction, but to recognize that humans have, we live with the potential of forces in other directions.
Mm-hmm. So I think what it makes me think of is just that whole idea of, and I think maybe we'll talk more into this, but one of the things that comes out of that is, for all of us, there is a deep longing to be known and be understood and loved and cared for, right? And when that doesn't happen, in some way, we move towards it. We seek it. We seek it out, and we're pointed in that direction, even if it means gaining it in unhealthy and ungodly ways. Sometimes that there is a propensity in us to move in that direction or to go along that vector. I don't understand junior science like you do, but certainly that's what comes to mind as you say, you talk about that metaphor.
Yeah. And to recognize so maybe you've given a bit of a tip too, when there is a depreciation or when there is a depletement of such emotional connection, can we say that the human being is more ripe for or more positioned to seek it out in other places?
Mm-hmm. Certainly, that's true. We have to be careful. So I think when we talk about emotional affairs, there's both the context of a marital relationship, but there's also individual factors. And so what we find when emotional affairs, do happen, when there is not a sense of caring and support emotionally, physically within the marriage relationship, certainly the risk of an emotional affair is greatly heightened, okay? We would also say it's the responsibility of each individual to maintain a godly life and to maintain proper boundaries, regardless of the context of the relationship, okay? So, but certainly when that isn't present in the marriage relationship, there's great risk for something like this.
Even as you gave those two categories, one, the context of the marriage, and also then the individual uniqueness, it does raise the observation that people have different emotional drives. Am I right about this? Some are emotional. Some people are very emotional. They connect deeply. Some are less emotional. They don't connect, or I don't know if it's a need or a know-how, but there's varying in the human experience as well, right?
For sure. Yep. There's factors that come into play, no doubt, individual factors.
So let's go into this. What does an emotional affair look like? You know, what would be some of those signs? You mentioned signposts. That would be helpful. What's happening when emotional betrayal is going on?
Yeah. Yep. So there's a couple indicators, right, that we would say this is turning into an emotional affair rather than just a friendship. So one is certainly if you think about what amount of headspace or thought life does this individual have with a friend outside the marriage relationship. So are they daydreaming about them? Are they thinking about them often, right? Are they rearranging their schedule to spend time with this individual? Mm-hmm. Are they beginning to withdraw from the marital relationship, right, emotionally, and finding themselves starting to share and open up to their friend, the friend outside of the relationship, more than their spouse, okay? Are they withholding information. And not even, and I think this is a clear differentiator too, Matt, is as we talked earlier about friendships outside the marriage can be healthy things. And I think where it begins to cross the line is our loyalty comes first to our spouse. And so what that means is that our spouse is okay with the friendships and aware of what we share in those friendships outside the marriage relationship. I think there's a clear line crossed when we begin to have relationships, secrecy, and that we aren't first loyal to our spouse if they're not okay with this, right? They're not okay with this friendship or that, or they're not okay sharing certain things, that we honor that because that's a first commitment to my spouse before friendship outside the marriage.
Yeah. Kaleb, but I would have to, I mean, we live in an online world. So human connection is happening in ways today that it didn't happen, even 20 years ago. And, the Lord only knows how that connection is going to look in another 25 years.
Yeah, right.
Speak to that online place.
Yeah. So, so I have my oldest daughter who is now a freshman in college, and so she lives, a couple hours away. And so I find technology really to be a helpful thing to stay connected with her. But it's also true that technology blurs some boundaries that we would say that are there when we're in person. And so that I begin to share things in the moment and find myself going down a path with someone online, whether it's just, I send a picture, or I connect with someone online through Facebook or Instagram or whatever platform. But then it can become a source of connection, and really with low boundaries that I'm starting to share information that I wouldn't think about doing in person.
Yeah. So what I hear in all of that is there's an acceleration that can happen, because I completely agree. There's ways to be vulnerable online through a text or a direct message that it would take a long time to muster if I'm face-to-face. And then there's this misperceived connection, right? On one end, they perceive this type of connection. On the other end, not so much, but depending on how you read it.
Right. Yes. And so there's a lot of kind of assumptions that are made or interpretations that aren't necessarily there, because you miss a large part of what we would say is part of communication, which is being able to sense what tone or the facial expression or all of these things that are just not part of the conversation.
That's good. Oh, that's very helpful.
Research would show that 82% of the time that when emotional affairs happen, the individual isn't seeking it out, which is really surprising to me. I would think when you think of emotional affairs or just infidelity in general, you often think, maybe it's just me, but that more would be actually actively seeking out. But in reality, that's not what we find.
Which is a little bit alarming, Kaleb, and kind of discouraging that it's something we can fall into. Is kind of the way you've said it. Right?
Yeah, it can start out as sharing an interest together and beginning to spend more time together. And so it's like these, like we're saying, like even what we would consider healthy engagement can begin to walk down a slippery slope. Now, again, this isn't meant to, we can't have friendships. We do need to have friendships. But I think Shirley Glass has done a lot of research. She's an author. She's no longer living. She's passed away. But she is known for her work in infidelity. And she would say there's three areas that we would kind of clear thresholds. And the first is emotional intimacy, kind of what we've been, talking about, is that sense of deep connection, sharing our deep fears, hopes, longings with someone else other than a spouse. And she uses this analogy, which I really appreciate, Matt. It's called the walls and the windows. And when emotional affairs are ripe to happen, what happens is there becomes a wall between you and your spouse. Which meaning, if you think about a wall, we're not transmitting information or longings, desires, fears through that wall. And we're beginning to open up a window to someone outside of the house. and sharing some of those intimate details, right? And so what you start to have is a wall within the relationship, the marital relationship, and beginning to disclose intimate, hopes, dreams, cares.
Yeah.
So I think the next threshold then, so the first is emotional intimacy. The second is secrecy. And we kind of already touched on this. I start with holding information rather than sharing it. Or we could say it kind of can go in two different directions, right? We stop talking at all about this friend outside the relationship, or we're always talking about this friend. They take up more and more space, even in the marital relationship, which is an indicator of something is happening within us. And if we find ourselves, again, beginning to kind of reflect and having to justify and like even questioning, if my spouse was there, right? If there was a videotape of us together, would I be comfortable sharing that with my spouse?
Yeah, right.
Is it something I'd give to them? Or does it, is there part of me that's like,
Yeah, in that secrecy space.
Yes.
Okay, I'm wondering if emotional affairs, what they have to do with sexual appeal. Is there something sexual that an emotional affair will, not that it may cross physical boundaries, but is that a thing? Does it not have to be a thing?
Yeah. So, the third threshold would be sexual tension.
Oh, the third one is?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it doesn't start there, but certainly if we think about the intensity of an emotional affair, it involves infatuation, idealization, right, of the friend in this case, and a sense of passion that often includes fantasizing, and certainly there's the sexual piece of that gets involved. Not acting it out, but certainly the thought processes involved in that.
Okay, so I just had an aha, and you can correct this. Could it possibly be that emotional affairs are so difficult and dangerous is because they follow the template of healthy human relationship that ends in covenantal marriage?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, Matt, I would agree with you. I think there's a deep bonding that happens, right? And it is, we would say, following a progression of healthy bonding within intimate marriage relationship, for sure. Yeah, and those are meant to be for those who are married, exclusive to the marriage relationship.
Speak then as a marital therapist. Speak then to the unique challenges of an emotional affair. Sometimes we can hear the phrase that it says, well, it wasn't physical, it was just emotional. As if to say, it's not as big of a deal. I don't even know how to make sense of that entirely, but I'm sure you've heard that.
Sure.
Speak a little bit to that.
Yeah, because like you're saying, it's we were just friends, quote unquote. And it minimizes, I think, whenever we didn't, touch or engage in any type of sexual activity physically, which can be a minimization of the reality that you think about the potency of bonding emotionally deep with someone. How does Proverbs 4:23, keep your heart with all diligence, for from it flows the spring of life. And you think about the life-producing, place within each of us.
That's the vector force I'm talking about.
That's the vector force. There you go. You brought it back in. And, you're giving this, and you think about that deep bonding that, by the way, happens over time. Someone can have a one-night stand, which is purely physical, sexual, and there is emotional bonding that happens, but not like a relationship that's over months, where there is a growing and an infatuation and we would
brain
say
space, time space,
exactly,
emotional space.
Idealizing, right? And in the secrecy of it, actually it continues to fuel kind of that sense of unhealthy infatuation and passion.
Yeah.
So with that, to begin to unravel and untangle that takes time, but it is also, if you think about it, for the one who has been betrayed, this is trauma. This is traumatic. And so it's deeply wounding, shatters their world, shatters their trust, and begins a sense of disorientation that's just really, really difficult. So it's not just an emotional affair.
All right, so lead us out then. What does recovery look like? What does repair look like? Please tell me that there is repair.
Yeah. So I think the first thing is that the one who is committing the affair acknowledges, takes responsibility for it, and cuts it off, right? Meaning there are clear boundaries. Now, that may look different, right? That may mean, if it happened at work, that may mean, okay, a new job.
Reassignment.
It may mean certain things that, this is something that has to be worked out with the couple themselves. It may mean clear boundaries, at work. So there's different things, but there needs to be a clear cutoff between that relationship. We would say, back to the windows and wall analogy, there needs to be a wall put between the affair partner and the spouse that has been unfaithful, and then opening up the window between the spouses.
Which is then taking away that secrecy, which you mentioned is kind of the fuel.
Yes.
So secrecy can be fuel. So that would be one aspect to cut the fuel, which in one sense is the secrecy.
Yep. And then I think just the ongoing honesty and transparency of the unfaithful spouse. And so really the if you think about the initial crisis, I think part of the initial phase is, how do we just kind of stabilize? How do we create safety in our relationship? And the interesting thing in that scenario, Matt, the unfaithful spouse really needs to become the comforter of the one who's been betrayed, and lean in, hear their pain, stay with them, not justify in any means what happened. And to be able to be there and hear, the hurt, the anger, as a way of saying, I'm here, I know, and obviously that's an ongoing
that would happen
process.
Over time.
Correct.
Because you're really talking about a trust rebuild, aren't you?
Right. And part of a trust rebuild is consistency, faithfulness, that the unfaithful spouse is doing what he or she said she's going to do over and over and over and over again, right? And acting in a trustworthy manner that begins to lay the framework after safety is established, to lay the framework for trust to be rebuilt.
Safety first, trust second.
Yes. And then when you have that trust, then you can begin to build intimacy. And so certainly there is a turning towards each other, whether it's in the initial stages of activities and sharing interest, and there needs to be a cultivating, right? What we'd say of friendship and emotional intimacy in time. This is all.
Yeah.
It's not uncommon for these to take 2 to 3 years to recover from, sometimes more. It depends on, right? I even hesitate to say a time frame because it's different for everyone, because they're so unique in the way that they're manifested and the individual factors of the one who engages in them, for sure. And then I think another thing that I think about, Matt, just as far as the recovery process, is that for the unfaithful spouse, they are grieving the loss of a pretty strong attachment. And that is also painful. And so they're going to need support as they navigate a relationship that was wrong, but deeply bonding. And now you're pulling that away and tearing it.
Yes.
And so there's grieving of that in order to be able to turn towards the spouse.
Kaleb, that just seems so tough and difficult. And I could see as potentially missed that a grieving process needs to ensue and needs to come to a completion. Like the safety, the shutting things down, that all makes sense to me. The building trust makes sense to me. And this grieving process makes a lot of sense to me, but it seems so almost offensive, right? How does the betrayed spouse view the grieving other spouse, right?
Yes.
And yet that's necessary is what I'm hearing.
It is. And I think in line with that, though, is the unfaithful spouse needs to find a way to do that outside of the marital relationship.
Okay.
Counselor, mentor, friend, right? Because it wouldn't be appropriate for the unfaithful spouse to turn towards
to be that person.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think that's an important piece of information, Kaleb.
And then I think the final, obviously, as the months, years go by, there does need to be a sense as a couple of understanding their story maritally. So that is to say, how did we get here? Like, where were the vulnerabilities that set us up? Not, again, I want to be very clear, not that the one who has been betrayed is responsible in any way, okay, for the behavior of the unfaithful spouse, but that the marriage relationship may have been in a context through which this could happen. And I think understanding that is a helpful piece for both spouses to inoculate, right, the marriage moving forward, to be able to know, okay.
Kaleb, that seems like it requires two very, very mature and healthy people.
Yes.
To step back and say, okay, we're gonna talk about this space without offense.
Yeah, for sure. Yes, there is a sense of connection and friendship and acceptance and compassion for each other that then beginning to reflect and say, okay, you know what were the marital factors and even individual factors? There's a resource that sometimes they use, Getting Past the Affair, that they have you lay out, okay, where was I at individually that set me up for this, for the one who was unfaithful? And then how about the marriage relationship? Were we supporting each other emotionally? Or were we in, a period of just dryness and stress or was there unresolved hurt and conflict that was going on? All of these pieces, again, aren't to justify in any way. It's just healthful reflection so that moving forward that we're aware and we can bond and engage in healthy relationships, because what they actually find is, in some cases, when couples don't talk about those things as hard as they can be, and they don't know, they can be set up for another affair. Exactly. Yeah.
When you go through those reformation steps of a healthy relationship, you've really laid out the architecture for a really strong relationship on the other side.
Yeah.
Have you seen that?
Yes.
Happen?
Absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah. Which is we think of the gospel and redemptive work that God does. And I think that's an expression of that, Matt.
Yeah.
For sure. And I think, Matt, that would be my heart, even as we bring this to a close, is allowing this conversation for all of us. This isn't about stirring fear in us. May it be about stirring us into seeing the couple that's celebrating 50 years. And maybe I'm not there. And what do I want to be celebrating then? And how can I do that now? Am I supporting my spouse emotionally, physically, turning towards them? If not, what stands in the way? I hope that for all of us can cultivate us towards each other through this process and motivate us in that way.
Towards one another with vector forces of attraction.
I'm waiting for it, Matt.
Because we all have them, yes, as human beings, and for that to drive us towards our spouses.
Yeah.
I think the carnage of emotional affair just speaks to the power of emotional connection that we can have with people, and most importantly with our spouses. And I think that's been well said. So thanks, Kaleb, for that. Thanks everyone for listening. Yeah, I'm sure this podcast hits you in many different ways depending on your experience and what you're going through. We honor that. We totally respect that, and we hope that this can be helpful. God bless you.